Harow, tour guide, podcaster, and public speaker. Grateful to Mizrahi for giving me a chance to give you a tour on Tisha B'Av of one of my favorite places to guide in Israel, and that is Herodian. There are going to be 3 time periods that we're going to talk about here on Herodian today. The first is going to be when Herodian was built by King Herod, the Great or not so great, depending on your perspective. The other one is going to be during the Great Revolt, 66 to 73, with the Chorban of Bayit Sheni, of course, in the year 70. And the third time period, and one that has turned out to be very, very important on this hill, is the Bar Kokhba revolt of 132 to 135, because it turns out that Herodian was no less than their headquarters. So there's some other small time periods here on the hill, Byzantine, etc., but these are the 3 main ones that we're going to focus on today. So this is a model of Herodian that was prepared for a very large exhibit at the Israel Museum a few years ago. It is already dated. They should really do models in Israel of archaeological sites out of Plato, because they keep digging and things change. But this is the main part of Herodian that we're going to be exploring today. The palace fortress on the top of the hill, very unusual for a Herodian structure in that it is round. And the archaeologist who was mainly responsible for discovering Herod's grave was a man named Ehud Netzer, who tragically fell to his death here at Herodian a few years after he found his tomb. But he was an architect by training, which gives you an idea of how he was able to get into Herod's head and figure out how and why he built things. And then his tomb, a reconstruction of what we think his tomb looked like, and a theater that was taken apart in order to build his tomb. So what you're looking at here is really a false mountain. There was a very small mountain here, and the fortress palace was put on top of it with all kinds of other things around, and we know there were many things that we've yet to find. After Herod died in -4, he reigned in Judea from -37 to -4, he requested that this whole thing be tamped on and made a huge monument to himself, and that this was going to be his tomb that everyone was going to see from afar. All you would see would be this, and it turns out that something very similar has been found in Rome, and that is the tomb of the Emperor Augustus. So what is the connection to Rome and to Augustus, whose also his name is Octavian? When Herod first starts ruling in -37, Cleopatra is the queen of Egypt, and Egypt, of course, is down in the south. That is why we believe now that Herod fortifies Masada at the tip of the Dead Sea, because Cleopatra wants to get into Judea. She wants the Dead Sea. In those days, it's not just a quaint place to float on and read a newspaper. There's asphalt there, which the Egyptians need for mummifying. And remember little Moshe Rabbeinu and his zephet, his little tarred basket? Our history would have been quite different if they hadn't been able to seal that little basket the way they needed to. And that kind of tar they got from the Dead Sea, as well as salt for purifying food. So the Dead Sea was a tremendous place for commodity, as well as the fact that in the fields here in En-Gedi and in Jericho grew an incredibly rare and expensive spice called, well, we call it in our sources, afarsimon, shemen afarsimon, also known as nataf and tzori. It was a major part of the ketoret of the incense spice in the Beit HaMikdash, and also probably what they anointed kings and prophets with. But it's how Herod made his money. Did you ever ask yourself? We're going to be asking that a lot today. Why? Why did this happen? Where did it happen? Herod built a lot. Anybody who's come to Israel, you know about Masada and Caesarea and Herodian and, of course, the Beit HaMikdash. Where did he get his money to do that? And we believe that it was from this commodity, which during his time was the most expensive commodity in the world, called Judean balsam. And he was able to sell this to the Romans. It also has a beautiful smell. It also has medicinal qualities, and it was very, very important. Now, Cleopatra, who was very good friends with Mark Antony at the time, and he was very important in the Roman Republic, he gave her the fields here, and Herod leased them back from her. He didn't want her anywhere near the Judean balsam fields. But what happens in -31 is that Mark Antony and Cleopatra go, and in a battle called the Battle of Actium, a naval battle near Greece, they battle Octavian, who's the up-and-coming power in Rome. And Rome is in a very transitionary period now, going from the Republic to the Empire. Octavian wins, and Cleopatra and Mark Antony go back to Egypt, eventually commit suicide. But Herod doesn't have to worry about them anymore. This is in minus 31. Herodian is built between minus 23 and minus 15. And it is a very Roman site, as opposed to Masada, which is much more Egyptian. This is a very Roman site. And you understand the relationship from this place between Herod and Octavian. What he is saying to Octavian is, I originally backed Cleopatra and Mark Antony, now I'm backing you. And Herodian is built as a pain to Octavian, saying, I'm your boy, I'm loyal to you, whatever you want I will do. And so when Marcus Agrippa, who's like, I guess, Octavian's chief of staff, if you will, comes, he's seeing the signs of that all the time. And as we go through Herodian, I'll point out to you as well. So there's a lot of symbolism in this place, and the historians and the archaeologists are now putting together things that we have found in Rome and in other places, and proving that Herod was trying to make Judea a very important part of the Roman Empire. He wasn't just doing it for the Jews, but he was really doing it for her standing in Rome. And there's a phenomenal question, was Herod even Jewish? His mother was a Nabatean named Kypros, and she, incidentally, he's got all his fortresses on the eastern side of the country, one of them named Kypros, near Jericho, after his mother, but there's Hyrcania, and there's Masada, and there's Jerusalem, and of course there's Herodian, all up and down, because his enemies are the Parthians coming in from the east. He's not worried about the Romans, he's part of the Roman Empire. He builds Caesarea as a port, probably to be able to send also the Judean balsam to Rome, because the current in the Mediterranean goes counterclockwise. And so as the boats are leaving Alexandria for Rome with a lot of wheat, because the Romans need to keep their people quiet and happy. Think about this in terms of the modern day. They give a lot of food, very cheap food, which is why they need the wheat coming up from Egypt. They don't have enough. They give a lot of entertainment, which we'll talk about later, in the form of gladiator games, and they give free water. So at the same time as Herod is here in Herodian, tremendous fountains and piazzas and flowing water is being built in Rome, and it's part of how the Romans are showing their power. There's different ways you can show your power. You can build tall buildings and stick your name on it, something that still happens today. You can build roads, which the Romans are doing at the time as well. They're the first ones to actually build roads and have milestones, which are 0.92 of our mile today. And also using water and displays of water and flowing water and aqueducts to show we can bring water from place to place. We have a lot of power. And this is exactly the time period for us here in Judea, where Herod is the transitional king. He's married to Mariam, the last Hashmonide princess. So to get back to the question, is he Jewish or not? According to modern halacha, unclear. But did the Romans consider him Jewish? Well, the Romans had a 10-day week, because what we gave to the world is the 7-day week. The 7 days has nothing to do with the sun and with the moon. It is biblical, okay, to get to Shabbat, the 6 days of creation, the importance of Shabbat. The Romans didn't want that. Neither, by the way, did the French during the French Revolution. They wanted 10 days, and the Romans called the 7th day Herod's Day. He was like the court Jew. So they thought he was Jewish, maybe. Did the Jews here consider him Jewish? Very unlikely. He had a very, very difficult relationship with the Judeans, and for very good reason. Although he builds the Beit HaMikdash, badatz, like not a pesel in sight, and a beautiful building, but he also killed many of the Judeans, and he was under no illusions as to how they felt about them. That's why he asked that on the day he died, 300 sages be killed, because while the people were kivyachol, like mourning the sages, it would be like they were crying for him. Fortunately, that wasn't listened to. Okay, so this is the time period of Herod, and then the other time periods that we're going to be dealing with here on the mountain is the Great Revolt, 66 to 73, and the Bar Kokhba Revolt. So this is Herodian more or less as we know it now. This is the context of the time period when he builds this, the only place that he does name after himself, and now we're going to head up into the mountain. As we start walking up the path to the top of the mountain, just a couple things I want to point out. One, of course, and if you've been on Masada, you've seen this, the ballista balls, like the cannonballs of the day, of the Romans, both for the Great Revolt and for the Bar Kokhba Revolt. They would have used this. There's a small mountain on the other side of Herodian, which we now know was the quarry, to build Herodian, but also it's the platform that the Romans used in order to attack Herodian. And now if you look, since we're still towards the bottom of the mountain, you can see that it's a fake mountain. You don't have big boulders here. You don't have limestone or dolomite, as you'll see in other parts in Israel. You see loose stone, and you can see that this mountain was created artificially afterwards, okay? It was not created by God this way. So we've come to the top of current day Herodian, and it's kind of like being on the rim of a crater, if you will, with a palace inside. This is a classic fortress on the edges of the desert. It's very high up, so you could build, let's say, bonfires and have some kind of connection with other high places. It is very well fortified, and it also has its own water and food supply. And to further keep the people safe, you had them tucked inside the walls of the palace fortress. So over here we have the Eastern Tower, which actually makes perfect sense that this would be the biggest tower, because we spoke about how the danger is coming from the east. All right, so we're going to be making our way down into there, but first what I want to do is show you what we're looking at and this phenomenal view from the top. So we're going to start off with Yerushalayim. In this direction, if you can see, and it's very hazy today, it's a hazy summer day, the three skinny towers on the top of the Mount of Olives. And remember, that's Jerusalem in the time of Herod. Just in front of the Mount of Olives, you would have what we call today the Old City and the City of David, and that is it. So from here, you can see that very easily. Moving off to the east, we're looking north. Moving off to the east, you can see there's a lot of Arab building here, which there was very little here pre-1967. There used to be a leper colony in this area, and they had some kind of like superstition not to build here. Of course, you can see a lot of this is what's called areas A and B right now, and all this side here are all Arab villages. If you can continue off to the right, though, in the horizon, possibly the identification of the hill where the little scapegoat was tossed on Yom Kippur. You can see the distance walked from Jerusalem, from the Beit HaMikdash. Continuing over to the right, you can see the Dead Sea. All right, we are just west of the Dead Sea, and just beyond it is Moab, the hills of Moab, today the modern country of Jordan. All right, so now moving on over to the west, we'll swing our way over. You can see the rest of modern Jerusalem. This section over here is Bethlehem. So just to jump into the Tanakh for a second, at the beginning of the book in Ruth, when Elimelech and Naomi leave Bethlehem, which of course Beit Lechem means the house of bread, it's a granary area, but there's a famine in Yehudah, and they go over to Moab, which we just saw. And normally we run down to Egypt when there's a famine in the land. In this case, they go to Moab, and that has to do with very interesting weather pattern that we have in this part of Yehudah. We get our weather from the west, from beyond, from the Mediterranean, and the clouds, when they hit the high mountains of the Judean Samaria mountain range, they dump their rain, and then they continue east to where we are right now. We're right on the edges of the Judean desert. They get over to the Dead Sea where it's very hot, the clouds reformulate. It only rains in the Dead Sea maybe 4 days a year, but then they hit the mountains of Moab, which are higher than we are. That's where Moshe Rabbeinu stands and looks at the land and knows that he won't be able to come in. When I was there on Har Nevo, standing where Moshe Rabbeinu stood, suddenly I realized the tragedy to be so close, and I knew I was going home, to be so close and yet not to be able to go in. But there the rest of the rain dumps itself beyond that range of Moab. They're part of the world belt of deserts, including the Negev. But this is a very small desert called a rain shadow desert. You don't think Elimelech and Naomi know what I just told you? That there's more rain on the eastern side of the rift right here than there is in Yehudah. And maybe there's a famine in Yehudah, there's still things growing in Moab. So why run all the way to Egypt when you can just do it here? And we can see and we can imagine to ourselves Ruth and Naomi coming back from Moab to Beit Lechem, and the beginnings of our story, and the beginnings of David HaMelech and Malchut David coming out of Beit Lechem, Yehudah. Model that was built, again, already a little out of date, showing you the 4 different directions, the biggest tower in the east, a cistern under that tower, and in the middle, a classic Roman style area, a big courtyard in the middle. We found these all over, well, all over the Roman Empire, and you would have had that down here as well. So they've reconstructed this, and what's important to see here are these double walls, which would have been used for storage and also now for wine. We have found that they stored here 30,000 liters of wine. And what that tells us is that, again, for Herod, this just wasn't like a little apartment, right? He was bringing the best of Rome to Judea. So they were making wine here, and they were eating kumai, which was like a fancy apple compote that came from Italy, and they had garum. We have found remnants of garum in all of Herod's palaces. It was a kind of fish paste that was all the rage in those days, kind of like Heinz ketchup that you'll just find on every table. So he was really bringing all of those symbols of Rome into Judea. The west, and if you see the tall ridge in the back, close to 1,000 meters above sea level, that's Israel's watershed, right? Our continental divide. What that means is that all the rainfall on this side of that mountain ridge, including where we're standing, goes down to the Dead Sea, which has a catchment basin of 40,000 square kilometers. And on the other side, it goes down into the Mediterranean. But for our purposes, that's where Derech Avot is. That's where the Jews, when they went on pilgrimage to the Beit HaMikdash, to the temple in Jerusalem 3 times a year, would have walked along that road, all right? Because we've got Hebron to the south, and this is all of Yehuda. They would have walked along that road. We have a mikvah that was found there for public use, for a lot of people using it, not attached to a village. And of course, we also have Roman milestones, 14, 13, and 12, etc., from Jerusalem. Incidentally, ground zero in Jerusalem is Shar Shechem. That's how many miles out it would have been, and sure enough, that's exactly how many it is. So we can see the past here. We can see Beit Lechem, Hebron to the south, Derech Avot, and of course Yerushalayim. And look down at the foot of the mountain, we can see that Herodian was much more than just the palace fortress on the hill that we're now exploring. It was also a village at the very bottom, and you can see very distinctly what are the remains of a pool. And I spoke to you about the importance of water and having water publicly seen to show power, and especially at the edges of the desert, we get maybe about 300 millimeters of water here a year. There is new thinking about that pool, though, not just as a place where you would swim and maybe swim out to the middle and get like a drink with a paper umbrella in the cup, but they're thinking based on other places that are very similar that they have found in other parts of the Roman Empire, that perhaps that was an area that was kind of tented, where you had birds flying, where you had turtle doves flying, and people sat on benches with water up to their ankles and kind of cooled off that way. Pigeons were a very, very important part of the world at that time. There are columbaria that we find dove cuts everywhere. Also for the Beit HaMikdash, for the most basic offering, korban in the Beit HaMikdash, but also for food, also for delivering messages, carrier pigeons, and also for fertilizer. So that's one of the new thinking there. And that has yet to be completely dug. There are what we believe remains of a palace under that road. That's the road that leads to Har Choman, to Jerusalem. And in the forefront, there is the remains of a village from the Byzantine period about 1,500 years ago. So one day Herodian is going to be an all-day trip. All right, you're going to come here, you'll be able to explore the upper parts as well as the lower regions, and all that really has yet to be uncovered. Side of the rim, and there are a lot more Jewish communities on this side than we have on the other side. Just below us is Sde Bar, a beautiful community. You have over here Kfar Eldad. In the back on that ridge you have Nokdim, which Avigdor Lieberman lives there. Then there is a very deep gorge. It's hard to see how deep it is. It's called Wadi Charitun. It leads all the way down to Ein Gedi. It dumps out in Nachal Arugot. And the larger community on this hill is modern-day Tekoa. Behind it is Tikwa, which is the Arab village of the original name of Tekoa, and that's where the Navi Amos is from. Now, what you're looking at here, though, in addition to the Jewish communities, is you're also looking at the bracha that's given to Yehuda in Parashat Vayechi, right? All the tribes are getting their blessing, and Yehuda is given a very strange blessing, probably not something that we would give to our children. Your eyes shall be red as wine, and your teeth shall be white as milk. It's an agricultural bracha. It's a bracha that's connected to the land. He is told that you will have land that is good for growing people food, like wine and vineyards, but also land that is good for shepherding. You do not want to let your goats and your sheep in a field of people food. They will eat everything in sight. And so to have a double bracha and have land for both is a phenomenal bracha. And you're looking at it here. This part of Yehuda, which we call Tzvar HaMidbar, the edges of the desert, is perfect for ranching. Stay Bar, for example, they have sheep and they have goats there. They also have a fantastic exotic animal farm. Next time you come to Israel, you must go visit. Yes, there are Komodo dragons now at the edges of the Judean desert. But you also have in the other part of, in modern terminology, what we call Gush Etzion, up on the ridge that I showed you before, where there's Neve Daniel and Efrat and Alon Shvut and Elazar, you have wineries and you have vineyards and pomegranate trees and figs. So you're looking at the bracha laid out right in front of you. Land for agriculture, for people food, and land for shepherding, which, don't forget, speaking of commodities, in the past, that was the family business before we were all into, day trading and high tech, right? That was the family business, was to be shepherds, not to mention that in the days of the Beit HaMikdash and you're doing korbanot, you have to have that available. And then you go out just a little more and you see really the deep desert. You can see where David HaMelech, he's going down to En Gedi, right, where he's hiding from Shaul. And that, you see the Dead Sea over there, En Gedi just below us as the mountains dip down. And you can really see that whole history. And you can also understand Herodian's place in the Great Revolt, which starts in 66 against the Romans in the Galil. And then they make their way down, the Churban of Yerushalayim, right? The Churban of the Beit HaMikdash, which we are commemorating on Tisha B'Av in 70. The Jews have now run to hide here. They've been here since the beginning of the revolt. This place goes down in 71, and further back into the desert, Masada is further south of here, Michvar, which is on the other side of the Dead Sea, and Masada, and they collapse respectively in 72 and 73. So you can see the running from Yerushalayim deeper and deeper, further into the desert, hopefully further away from the Romans, although of course that's not exactly how it works out. So the area here, you see Yerushalayim, you see the desert and Masada, and you can totally understand the trajectory of how our forefathers are running and hiding from the Romans during that terrible time period. Standing in a bathhouse because, Herod liked his luxuries. A bathhouse in the Roman world was a very important place. It was like an internet cafe / gym / library. There's a couple of them that have been found here in Herodian. What makes this one so interesting is that this is the original dome. Despite the fact that we're on a rift, okay? We're on an area, the Syro-African rift, where two tectonic plates slide past each other. Israel goes south a couple centimeters a year, while on the other side, Jordan goes north. And every once in a while, when the pressure builds up, we get an earthquake. This dome has held. It has not been rebuilt. This is the original dome. What you can also see here, though, is the remains of the plaster. You wouldn't have seen this exposed stone during the time. You would have seen plaster, and note that the color that remains here is red. So I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes, but that happens to be very significant. And as we go out of the bathhouse here, speaking of earthquakes, you can see some of the damage that was done to the walls. That is damage that was done during earthquakes. Those are the double walls that I was talking to you about, which were used for storage, and also where we found that Herod had a winery. So now we're inside the palace fortress itself. You can see a lot of the reconstruction work that's being done here. Some of the places are not accessible to us, and also, fixing up the chinks. And we're going to be going down into now Herod's original garden and finding where our ancestors stayed while they were here. Down now inside the former garden, you can see some of the pillars. What's interesting about these pillars is they point to a mistake that Josephus made. Josephus said that there were marble pillars both in the Beit HaMikdash and in other Herodian palaces. There were not. There wasn't marble in Eretz Yisrael until the Byzantine period. You can see that they did maybe what some of us have done at Home Depot, right? You want that beautiful mahogany scaffolding around your dining room ceiling, right? Like a beautiful molding, but you don't want to put mahogany up there. So you go to Home Depot, you buy some styrofoam, and you spray paint it to look like mahogany. So what they did is they made barrels out of the limestone and they stacked them on top of each other, and then they plastered them to look like marble. And we're finding that in all the Herodian palaces around the land. But what I can tell you Herod did not have is a mikvah in his living room. And so we know that the mikvah was put here by the Judeans, either from the time of the Great Revolt or the Bar Kokhba Revolt, we're not sure, including in Otsar. And what does the mikvah tell us? Well, if it's from the time of the Great Revolt, it tells us that they were still planning to go back to the Beit HaMikdash. They wanted to keep tahor, they wanted to keep pure, because remember, the revolt starts in 66, the Jews are already here in 66, the Beit HaMikdash is destroyed in 70. So for part of the time that they're here, the Beit HaMikdash is still standing. They don't know the end of the story like we do, and they wanted to keep doing that and keep tahor for the Beit HaMikdash, and it also means that they were having children. They were having families. You do not bring children into a world where you think they are doomed. So we understand the hope of the future when you look at a mikvah, that they are having children and having families, and they are sure that they're going to ride out the Roman Empire. Now there's another mikvah on the other side here, but also a weapons foundry from the time of the Bar Kokhba Revolt. This weapons foundry and also a major pottery workshop that we have found has led historians and archaeologists to the conclusion that this was no less than the headquarters of the Bar Kokhba Revolt. Herodian was not just a place where the Jews hid during the Bar Kokhba Revolt, but actually made their headquarters. Because from 132 until 135, 136, there was an independent state of Yehudah in more or less what we now know as Gush Etzion. So from the Dead Sea and further beyond the watershed, this area, they minted coins. In a minute when we're sitting, I'll show you an example of Bar Kokhba coin, and this was actually an independent state of Yehudah. They went against the Roman Empire, the Bar Kokhba Revolt. They knocked out one legion completely. They did tremendous damage to two others. You can see why the Romans were none too pleased with the Judeans, okay? We were just like, we kept bothering them. We kept wanting to worship Hashem, to have our Beit HaMikdash. And what we feel the kickoff of the Bar Kokhba Revolt is, here you can see over here, where they would have lead connecting, I'll put my water bottle here, connecting the different pipes, was the fact that if the first Beit HaMikdash is destroyed and the second one is rebuilt 70 years later, this must be going in 70-year breaks. So if the second Beit HaMikdash is destroyed in 70, then by 140 or so, we're going to be rebuilding the third. So you can understand the timeline. 132, that we're going to start getting ready for the third Beit HaMikdash, in addition to the fact that Hadrian, who's the miserable, at least to us, emperor of Rome at the time, is turning Yerushalayim into a pagan city called Aelia Capitolina. Who is with Bar Kokhba at the time? No less than Rabbi Akiva. And there are those who, and it's not quite clear if Rabbi Akiva actually thought that Bar Kokhba was Mashiach or that he could have been Mashiach, but there's a lot going on at the time. Incidentally, this is the reason that the Christians, because it's the beginning of Christianity, don't participate in the Bar Kokhba Revolt. Why would they think he was Mashiach? According to them, Mashiach had already come. So they sit out. I'm going to pull out some pictures and we're going to continue in just a second. Standing inside what was probably Herod's reception room with pillars, and it was turned into a synagogue by the Judeans. And there's a very interesting question about under which revolt this was turned into a synagogue. For a long time they felt that this was a synagogue from the Great Revolt, because we have others. We have the ones on Masada, we have the ones on Gamla. There are about 12 synagogues that had been found in Modi'in that existed at the same time as the Beit HaMikdash, which of course makes a very interesting question, because synagogues and prayer replaced the korbanot in the Beit HaMikdash. So how do you have synagogues that coexisted with the Beit HaMikdash? The name gives it away. It's a Beit Knesset, it's not a Beit Tfilah. It's a place of gathering, not a place of prayer. But what is maybe more interesting than this being from the Great Revolt and maybe existing at the same time as the Beit HaMikdash is they haven't found remains here from before the Bar Kokhba revolt. So there is a theory that maybe this is a synagogue from the Bar Kokhba revolt. And why is that fascinating? Because we don't have any. We have maybe one other near Beit Shemesh in a place called Itri. And you have to ask yourselves, if you have something, 1st century, and then it disappears 2nd century, and then we start having Batei Knesset again in the Galilee, because after the Bar Kokhba revolt, spoiler alert, this entire area of Yehuda is ethnically cleansed of its Jews, and virtually our whole Jewish life moves up to the Galilee and to the Golan, and then you start finding many, many synagogues. But what happened in the 2nd century? Were the Jews afraid to have houses of prayer? Was it transitioning from a place of gathering in the absence of the Beit HaMikdash? Now the Judaism is going through a major, major change when you don't have korbanot and you have rabbinic Judaism as we practice it today. So that's a fascinating question. And for me, this place is a very personal place. I was one of the people who years ago started coming up here on Tisha B'Av to say Echa. To come to Herodian and to say Echa, to come to the place where, whether it was in this room or above, the Jews had just run from Yerushalayim. From the rim, as we just saw, you can see Yerushalayim. They're standing on Herodian, watching the Beit HaMikdash burn, watching Yerushalayim be destroyed. So to come here and to say Echa with a little flashlight, sitting on the floor, is very different than sitting on the carpeted floor of Young Israel of whatever. It really brought it home. I stopped coming here after 2005 because Tisha B'Av of 2005, I was in the Veda Kalim. I was in Gush Katif. And I had moved there for the summer, and it was the day before the destruction of Gush Katif began. Before Gush Katif, the Jews living in Gaza and in the northern Shomron, their homes were destroyed, their livelihood was destroyed, 10,000 Jews were made homeless, and 25 Jewish communities were destroyed. And we're paying for that today. And at the time, and I didn't even live there, I just come, I had friends there, and my heart and soul was with them. Davening on Tisha B'Av in the summer of 2005 was what davening on Tisha B'Av should actually be, where there's a churban looming, a real churban that was looming. Because not just in the ancient world, but even in the modern world, sometimes you have powerful people who know how to build and also know how to destroy. And after that, Tisha B'Av has never been the same for me, because I understood what looking at a churban actually meant. And some of my friends have still not come out of it, and it's 15 years later, and that's a very personal pain that changed Tisha B'Av for me forever. So you have this synagogue, and you have the Jews that came here. And I want to read to you about why I mentioned before, why there's an idea that Bar Kokhba might have been Mashiach. So on January 21st, in the year 132, there was something called a supernova. I mentioned a few minutes ago how celestial, the moon and the sun and all those kinds of movements were very important in the ancient world, right? The 7 days is really an artifice that we put on in terms of a time frame, and that's to emphasize the importance of Shabbat, and we changed the world when it comes to that. But there's a supernova event, a star that died and illuminated the sky, and everybody interpreted it in their own way. The Jews interpreted it to mean Mashiach. And why? Because reading here from Parashat Balak, Bamidbar, Kaf Dalid, and part of the curse that's really a blessing of Bil'am, what I see for them is not yet, what I behold will not be soon. A star rises from Jacob, a scepter comes forth from Israel. It smashes the brow from Moab. And this has meant it to be an allusion, a reference to Mashiach, and Kochav Mi'akov. So the Jews see this as Bar Kokhba, Bar Kosiba, Bar Kokhba, and that he must be Mashiach. Hadrian took this to mean something else. Hadrian, again, as I said, was the emperor at the time. And there was a young man of whom Hadrian was very fond who had just drowned in the Nile. Apparently he fell off one of the boats. Maybe someone pushed him. It's not really clear. And Hadrian makes him into a god. He sees this same celestial event as meaning that this young boy was actually a god. And why is this important to us? Because we found the remains of the different beliefs on coins. This is a sample of a coin, a picture of a coin from Bar Kokhba, all right? And this are the signs of Sukkot, okay? The lulav, the etrog. By the way, just one hadas and one arava, because that's how Rabbi Akiva interpreted it. This coin tells you the relationship between Bar Kokhba and his Rebbe, Rabbi Akiva. He's minting a coin, even though it's a minority opinion, which is why we don't do it today. This is his Rebbe, and this is how he's going to mint his coin, according to Rabbi Akiva. And this side of the coin, we believe, shows us the outside of the Beit HaMikdash. Remember, there are still people alive who've seen the Beit HaMikdash. It's 62 years later. All right? And the Lechem HaPanim, the shewbread table. And on the top here is a little star. And so we believe that this star references this pasuk, and according to the Jews' feeling that perhaps Bar Kokhba really was Mashiach. And in 132, the revolt was going very well for the Jews. 132 really, it started off very well. The same star has been found on a Roman coin to this boy Antoninus, who was made into a god. So this is some of the interesting research that's being done now, is to compare coins that are minted at the same time, but by different people, and what their interpretations of it would have been. The Bar Kokhba revolt ends in total destruction, close to 600, according to Dio Cassius. As I said before, we don't have Josephus, we don't have really a Jewish historian of the time, but we have outside sources like Roman sources, Dio Cassius, who says that 580,000 Jews were killed, hundreds of villages were destroyed at the time of the Bar Kokhba revolt. And that is where the name Palestine comes in, a name that for many of us who are trying to still prove that the Judeans are the indigenous people to Yehuda and have to deal with this name, it comes from Hadrian, who, as he's destroying Yehuda, wants to also destroy the name Yehuda, Yehudim. And so he renames this area Syrio-Palestine, which is where today's name Palestine comes from, Hadrian in the 2nd century. So you have to know your history to understand some of the different things that we are dealing with today. Going down into the mountain and understanding how the Judeans hid in this mountain for so many years. Watch your head. Come through. Nice to get out of the hot summer sun. Okay, not a skylight. I'll explain in a minute what that is. Under the floor of the fortress, in an area where the original mountain was. And what this is here is chalk. I'm not all that strong. And this is the key to Herodian, is that this area, it was built on top of chalk. Most of Israel is covered with limestone. This is chalk. Why is chalk so fantastic? Because you can dig into it easily, and it also holds water without having to be plastered. And so here's a bor mayim. This is a cistern, and we are right now inside a cistern. When we looked up and we saw the opening, that's where rainwater would come in and fill up this area, okay? That's a bor, like we have also mentioned the Tanakh with Yosef, right? A cistern, and we know that that story happens in the summer because when he's thrown into the pit, en bo mayim, right? Because the water gets used up over the course of the summer. It fills up during our rainy season between Sukkot and more or less Pesach. And this is a be'er, this is a well, which is a completely different animal, existing water that you tap into. And we have places in Israel where we have wells. And you can understand when you read the Tanakh, the importance of water in desert societies. So many stories that happen in the Tanakh near the well, because how you share the water and how you deal with water distribution tells you a lot about also if you have any power, right? The fact that Israel has water security now is huge in terms of our strength, that we can provide food and water for our people is a very, very big deal in a still drought-ridden Middle East. But what happened when the Yehudim came down in this mountain, and you can imagine it like an anthill. They came into the mountain and they dug through the chalk and they connected the different cisterns and they lived down here. We have found remains of their houses, of pots, of coins, of anything that you would expect to find where people live. And the Romans had a great difficulty in attacking them here because they were in this mountain. The Romans would come in if they could find an open passageway with all their gear. It was dark, right? The Judeans knew all the little trails, they knew all the tunnels and where to hide, and they could beat back the Romans. Eventually, what happens, apparently in both revolts, is that the Romans smoked out the Jews. But you can understand why this was the headquarters of the Bar Kokhba revolt for so many years, and they managed to maintain it even with the Romans all around in the countryside. The Bar Kokhba revolt, because a lot of the research that's been done, this is not where the final battle happens. The final battle happens in a place called Beitar, not the Beitar with which many of you might be familiar and even have relatives or friends living, but what is now a Palestinian Arab village called Batir, not far from today's Beitar. We have their terracing and springs and the signs of Jewish life, including the final battle with the Romans. And we believe that this final battle happened on Tisha B'Av in 135. And one of the miracles of Tu B'Av, which of course a few days later, is that initially the Romans did not allow the Jews to bury our dead, that they sat for a couple of years out in the scorching Judean sun, but that they did not decompose, and that finally we were allowed to bury our dead. And that is where part of our Birkat HaMazon comes from. And I know it's not fair, it's not something we're going to be saying today, it's Tisha B'Av, and we're all fasting. But this keta after Uvnei, Baruch Atah Hashem, Melech HaOlam, Avinu Malkeinu, Adirenu Boreinu Go'aleinu, המלך הטוב והמיטיב לכל שבכל יום ויום הוא היטיב, הוא מיטיב, הוא ייטיב לנו. That this section was actually put in here after the Romans allowed us to bury the people. So here we have a Tisha B'Av connection, a not fair benching connection on a day that we're not eating, and bringing Bar Kokhba into a place, not just a time and a heartbreak, but actually into the physical place. And as we go down here through the mountain, you can see how they lived. And again, they thought that they would win. They were taking on the mighty Roman Empire. Why, by the way, did we keep rebelling against the Romans and think we were going to win? Both the Great Revolt and the Bar Kokhba Revolt. And incidentally, there's another revolt in between called, it happens in Cyrene in today's Libya. Does Libya even exist anymore? From 117 to 119. We know very little bit about it. Why do we keep rebelling against the Romans? Because we remember the Hashmonaim, right? L'achzir atara liyoshna, to bring back the glory days. The Hashmonaim also went up against a very powerful empire, and they won. And so there's this feeling like we'll be able to, but after Bar Kokhba and after the complete decimation of Yehuda, everything quiets down for a very, very, very long time, except that we're back now in Yehuda and in Israel. And as much as Tisha B'Av is still for us a day of tremendous mourning, even that someone will occasionally bring up a question that maybe, just maybe, like there's a chance to be joyous and that this terrible gzerah is starting to be turned around, even the fact that we can bring this up as a question brings me great joy. Because for so many hundreds and thousands of years, Tisha B'Av was a miserable day with no getting away from it. And now, are we seeing the light, literally the light at the end of the Tisha B'Av tunnel? Please God, I hope so. Let's continue. Remains of a tunnel from the Great Revolt. Remember, they didn't have stairs and banisters in those days. They had ropes and ladders made out of rope. We have date palms down in En-Gedi, right at the Dead Sea, where you can make rope from. And they didn't have lights, and this was a lot harder to find their way through, but they did. By the way, over here we have a palm frond, which is a big sign, not just for the Jews, but also for the Romans during those days, but of course showing the centrality of the tree and a lot of the uses for the tree. Inside one of the Herodian cisterns that the Jews dug out and used for their purposes, this shows us how water came in here during the days of Herodian. Obviously, this is not open to the ceiling. This is one of the areas where from the pool outside, we believe that donkeys dumped water in here. There's a very big aqueduct system on the other side of Gush Etzion, the Efrat, Alon Shvut, Neve Daniel side, the watershed side, which has a lot more water. And water was brought here from there. Some of the water went to the Beit HaMikdash in Yerushalayim. One branch went over here. And these are the original stairs where the people would come down and dip their bucket in and collect the water. And you can still see some here, the plastering on the wall here to hold in some of the water, and some of the birds now fly in. So these are the remains of some tunnels from the Bar Kokhba revolt. Obviously, they can date it from what they find inside. There are many tunnels that have not yet been open to the public and possibly will never be. They need to be excavated, of course, but also for safety reasons. And over here, there is a map, again, from the exhibit that they had in the Israel Museum about Herodian. And here you can see what Herod had built and how the Jews did a little bit of refurbishing. So here is the palace fortress where we started, and the way that we have walked now is what the Jews carved out. The green are the big cisterns that Herod had put here inside the mountain, and the Jews created a whole network of tunnels to get from place to place and to live and to hide for many, many years. You know, as difficult as today is, and thinking about the history and so many people who died here in Yehuda in both these revolts, but I can't help but think to myself that if they knew that we would be here again, and maybe they did, maybe they realized somewhere that this particular revolt might fail, but one day they never give up the faith, that one day Yehudim will once again be living in Yehuda. And that's exactly what we have going on here today. It's something that I've lived in Israel for 32 years. There's not a day that goes by that I don't think about that and don't take anything for granted and feel that we're living here not just for ourselves, but for them. This was not a waste. They did not die for nothing. We're back again. Yerushalayim is an unbelievable, beautiful city. Beit HaMikdash hasn't been rebuilt yet. That'll be up to us. But we're definitely on the right road. The Romans thought that the Jews were lazy because we took a day off a week. Okay, now everybody has at least a 2-day weekend. But during this time period that we're talking about here, when Herod built Herodian, there are a lot of changes happening in the world. And people start having leisure time. So what do you do with your leisure time? Well, one of the things that they did is they would build theaters for entertainment. And we have found that here at Herodian, a theater that was probably twice this size. Part of it was taken apart later to build his tomb. And inside the glass, I can't take you there now because they are redoing it, were the box seats. And they were painted on plaster. We're all familiar with frescoes, which is painting on wet plaster, but there was something even more difficult to do that needed very specialized artists, and that was called secco, and that was painting on dry plaster. So you can really see the effort that Herod put in here to make this a very important place, and it looks out towards Yerushalayim. So anybody who's coming here, again, he's showing his power. I am king of Judea. I am king of everything that you see. I have pictures of what's going on inside that building, though, knowing that I wouldn't be able to get in. And this is the building, how it was found. And notice the preponderance of the color red. And I said that at the beginning of our tour, that colors are very important. Cinnabar is the color red, and Octavian Augustus came from a town where cinnabar was mined. So when we talk about how Herodian is showing his loyalty, is showing Herod's loyalty to Rome in many different ways, including use of the color red, so that when his proxies would come here, they could go back to Rome and say, wow, Herod is really your guy. He's even using the color that's found in the town in which you were born, that's mined there. And all this little symbolism, which so many of us have forgotten the meaning of symbolism or never knew it from the ancient world, really shows itself up here in the theater. This also is a tris. A tris is like a false window, and this is a close-up of the tris inside what we call the box seats, and this is a painting of the Battle of Actium. Right? So the Battle of Actium, the sea battle, where once again Cleopatra and Mark Antony lose and Octavian wins, that's what he's got, kind of a false picture on the back of his box seats to show how important that whole battle was for him as well. Now, we spoke briefly about how the Romans kept their people quiet by providing very cheap food. McDonald's, $5, right? Gets you your 2,000 calories a day for a lot of people in the United States. Sorry to bring up food again. And free water. And also, Panit Kirkas, also entertainment. Now, the entertainment for the Romans were in the form of gladiator games, all right, where you would either have people killing each other or you would have wild animals come in. There were certain animals that went extinct during the time of the Roman Empire because of how often they were used in gladiator games. Now, I call this a theater This is a theater, not an amphitheater. A theater is half a circle. An amphitheater, ampi, is two. Ambidextrous, ambulatory, right? Amphibians breathe on land and on water. An amphitheater is two theaters. And so when you want to have a gladiator game, you are going to have it in an amphitheater, right? So this is a theater. Other places in the land we have found amphitheaters. Now, Rabbi Akiva is the spiritual backer, if you will, of Bar Kokhba. We talked about that all through our tour. Rabbi Akiva is killed in 135 in an amphitheater, possibly the Hippodrome in Caesarea, and dies, of course, saying Shema Yisrael, as, you know, finally being able to fulfill what it actually means. The rabbis talked about how one day we would learn Torah where the Romans played their terrible games. And 3 years ago, I was with my entire family, my children and grandchildren, in Rome. One of my sons was studying medicine in Italy, and he got married in Italy, and we all went for 2 weeks. And we're standing inside the Colosseum. And we know that the Colosseum, which is where they played these games, was used where many Jews were killed. Jews who were taken as slaves to Rome were killed in the Colosseum. And we know that the Colosseum was built by money that was taken from the Beit HaMikdash. They found a sign that shows that. And I pulled out my Tanakh in the Colosseum with my children and grandchildren, and we learned Torah because the rabbis were right. The Romans were the Romans now. We like pasta. It's a great place to visit when you can travel. The Judeans are back. The Romans are gone. And we have a part in making the words of the sages come true. Where the Romans played their terrible games and where our people paid a terrible price for their entertainment, we can now learn Torah. And it's those little steps that can anchor us in times that are very uncertain, like we live in uncertain times, to understand that we're playing the long game here, the Judeans and the Yehudim. But we're back and they're not. And so when we read about Rabbi Akiva and his death and the death of the other great rabbis in the 2nd century, on Yom Kippur, Asara Harugei Malchut, those are the rabbanim that are killed during the 2nd century because they insist on teaching Torah. And the Romans in Hadrian, they don't want us doing this anymore. Stop wearing tzitzit because that blue thread reminds you that you're a royal people. Stop giving Brit Milah. Stop learning Torah. Except that we're doing that all again today. So we paid a very difficult and bitter and hard price for it so many years ago, but we've succeeded in overcoming that. And just to get back to the theater and the understanding of why this kind of entertainment was so important, there's a fascinating sentence that was found on the back of the box seats. "Bring me no honey-hearted wine, my honored mother." That's a verse from the Iliad written by Homer. Herod is bringing philosophers and musicians into this area. He's bringing Roman culture into this area of Yehuda. Little symbols that we have found here show how hard he is trying to make this a part of the greater Roman Empire. And some Jews fell to that, and some fell to the influence of Rome, but the hardcore stayed with the program, and because of them, we are here today, touring Herodian as a fascinating archaeological site, connecting it with Tisha B'Av, but under the control of the Israeli government, with millions of Jews once again living in Eretz Israel. Which is where what Ehud Netzer and most archaeologists and historians, not all, believe was Herod's resting place. We didn't find a sign here saying here lies Herod, but they did find the remains of some beautiful sarcophagi of burial, like big coffins, made out of very special stone. You had the white milch stone here. There was obviously a very beautiful platform here. Here's a picture that I'd taken at the very beginning. You can see also the remains here that they found. Again, the majority is red. We discussed that. And some of the beautiful designs in the area. And this is a reconstruction. It would have been much, much bigger, like 25 times bigger. If you look and you see the black line, that's the reconstruction line. So anything below it was actually found. Anything above is what they think it looked like. And for those of you who are familiar with Yerushalayim, this is going to look like something that in the Kidron Valley outside the old city at the foot of the Mount of Olives, Avshalom's tomb, which is from that same time period. End of Beit Sheni, 2,000 years ago, 1st century BCE. first century Common Era. I'm so tired of dating our cottage cheese towards when Jesus wasn't born. We really have to start using the Hebrew dates. That's like, should be a goal for all of us. We know today's Tisha B'Av, but usually how many of us know the Hebrew date of any specific day that we're on? Anyhow, what you had on the very top, like that little cone called the Nefesh, part of it was found, and based on the part that was found, they were able to extrapolate, the engineers were able to extrapolate what it might have looked like. The design that was all the rage in those times were these, what they call these rosette design, and they found some pieces of it, and they were able to reconstruct what they think that his grave would have looked like. You find these also on ossuaries from that time period, bone boxes that were found where people were buried, right? That stops happening, incidentally, burial in bone boxes, because it's a second stage burial. It's a two-stage burial. You go into a cave, into the kuchim, and after a year, your children take out your body, which is now bones, and put them into an ossuary. But the Bar Kokhba revolt was so devastating that people didn't even know if their children would be around to rebury them a year later, and that's when burial changes from ossuaries into just like one stop and into the ground. Something, incidentally, that is very much on people's minds these days, because as we run out of land for burial, they're going back to something similar to that in different places, like in Yerushalayim Har Menuchot, topic for another video perhaps. So you have this here, and you have the rosettes, as I said, which were the design. And now what happened to Herod's grave? They found it smashed in pieces. The theory is that the Jews, who really hated Herod, and for very good reason, came here after he died, maybe immediately after he died, maybe it was not till the Jews came decades later as part of the Great Revolt, but the theory is that the Jews smashed his grave. Bones were found, and they were sent to a lab, and they are bones of an older man, in his 70s. But because we don't have his hairbrush with his DNA, Herod, so we're not sure if it was Herod. But there were bones of an older man found, so who knows? Perhaps this was him. We may never actually know for sure. This area was built on another cistern as well. Again, the importance of water. And as you take a look at this mountain as we're leaving it, you can see the cleft above us, which is part of a beautiful staircase that has been uncovered that led down to this area, to the area of the theater. It collapsed. We're looking at the side. We're looking at the original stairs. Now we see the handrails. That's a modern staircase that's been rebuilt. And as the years go on, they're going to open this up to the public. So Herodian, don't think that today's tour means you never have to come to Herodian. God willing, you're going to be back in Eretz Yisrael very soon, and come out here. Believe it or not, there's a lot more to learn and a lot more to say. We had an hour. I think we did pretty well, but this site is constantly changing. New things are being opened up. New conclusions are coming as to some of the things that they've found, and this is an ongoing process. This is the only national park in Yehuda, and I can't help but think sometimes the irony that maybe Herod is going to save Yehuda, because the Israeli government is putting a lot of money into this, and in the thoughts and not understanding of what's going to be Israel and what's going to become some Palestinian entity, it just could be that the last laugh will be ours, and that Herodian and the investment in Herodian and the importance of this site will convince any Israeli government that this should remain in Israeli hands. Wouldn't be the only irony of our history. So thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you found this interesting. I hope you have an easy fast. And more than that, I hope this is the last time that we have to fast on Tisha B'Av. Eve Harow, from Gush Etzion, from Yehuda, from the heart of Eretz Yisrael.